The warning sirens had been screaming for 3 days now. Ambassador Thisari pressed her scaled hands against the cold metal of the communication console, watching the red dots on the display move closer to her world. Each dot represented a Vorthak warship. Each warship carried enough firepower to burn a city. Kepler 442c had been peaceful for over 200 years. The Zephyrians who lived there grew food, healed the sick, and built beautiful gardens under 3 purple suns. They had no armies. They had no weapons designed to kill. The strongest thing they owned was a mining laser used to cut through rocks. Ambassador, the Vorthak fleet will reach our system in 48 hours, reported Captain Veltar from across the command center. His blue scales had turned pale with fear. Our civilian transports can maybe evacuate 50,000 people. We have over 2 million. Thisari closed her eyes. The Vorthak hegemony was like a disease that spread across the galaxy. They arrived at peaceful worlds, took everything useful, and left behind dead rocks. 63 worlds had fallen to them in the past 5 years. No one could stop them. Have any of the other species responded to our calls for help? She asked. Veltar shook his head. The Galactic Council is still debating. They say they need more time to consider the political implications. The Antaran Trade Consortium offered to sell us 3 old cargo ships at full price. The Kralix hegemony sent their thoughts and prayers. Thisari wanted to scream. Her people were about to die, and the galaxy was offering thoughts and prayers. She had sent messages to every known civilization. She had begged for anything. Medical supplies for the wounded, food for the hungry, ships to help evacuate civilians, even just a small escort to protect the few transports they had. Most species had ignored her completely. Those who replied offered token help that would barely save a few hundred lives. Everyone was afraid of the Vorthak. No one wanted to make enemies of such a powerful force for the sake of one small farming world. Ambassador, called out Communications Officer Drenval. We have another response coming in. Who from? Thisari asked, though she expected another useless offer. The Terran Colonial Defense Force. Thisari paused. She had heard of humans, but they were new to galactic politics. They had only made first contact 20 years ago. Most species still thought of them as primitive newcomers who barely understood space travel. They lived on worlds far from the main trade routes. What do they say? Drenval read from his screen. Aid package en route. Estimated arrival 72 hours. Signed, Terran Colonial Defense Force. The message was short, almost casual, like someone confirming a dinner appointment rather than responding to a desperate plea for help. That's it? Veltar asked. No details? No conditions? No requests for payment? That's the entire message, Drenval confirmed. Thisari felt a small spark of hope. At least someone was coming. She did not expect much from the humans. They were probably sending whatever old ships they could spare, maybe a few cargo vessels with medical supplies, perhaps a small escort to help with evacuations. Still, it was more than anyone else had offered. Send a reply, she ordered. Thank them. Ask for estimated ship count and cargo capacity so we can prepare for their arrival. The next few hours crawled by like years. The Vorthak fleet kept getting closer. Zephyrian civilians packed what they could carry and waited for transport ships that might never come. Children cried in their parents' arms. Elders sat quietly, accepting that they would probably die on the world where they had been born. Thisari tried to stay strong for her people, but inside she felt empty. Even if the humans brought help, what could they possibly do against 300 Vorthak warships? The bioships of the hegemony were living weapons, bred for destruction and powered by the life force of conquered worlds. They had crushed every military that faced them. The reply from the humans came 8 hours later. Thisari read it 3 times before she understood what it said. Fleet composition classified for operational security. Prepare landing zones for humanitarian operations. Clear orbital space within 50,000 kilometers of planet. Terran 3rd Fleet departing Sol system now. Fleet? Veltar repeated when she read it aloud. They're sending a fleet? Maybe it's a translation error, suggested Drenval. Perhaps they mean a small group of ships and their language doesn't have the right word. But Thisari felt something strange in her chest. Something she had not felt in days. Hope. Real hope. The humans had not asked for payment. They had not made demands. They had not spent weeks debating politics. They had simply said they were coming. Start preparing the main spaceport for refugee operations, she ordered. If the humans are bringing ships, we need to be ready to load civilians quickly. How many people should we prepare to evacuate? asked Veltar. Thisari looked at the tactical display. The Vorthak fleet was now less than 2 days away. Their bioships moved like a swarm of hungry insects, leaving dead systems behind them. All of them, she said quietly. Prepare to evacuate everyone. It was impossible. No fleet in galactic history had ever been large enough to evacuate 2 million people quickly. But something in the human message made her think they might actually try. The next day brought chaos. Civilian transports lifted off carrying whatever refugees they could hold. Space traffic control worked around the clock to manage the evacuation ships from other species, who had finally decided to help. A few dozen cargo vessels from nearby systems had arrived, offering to take small groups of civilians to safety. But it was not enough. Even working perfectly, they could maybe save 300,000 people. The rest would face the Vorthak alone. Then the long-range sensors picked up something impossible. "Ambassador," called the sensor operator, his voice shaking. "I'm reading massive hyperspace signatures at the edge of the system. Something big is coming." "The Vorthak?" Thisari asked, though it was too early for them to arrive. "No, ma'am. The signatures are wrong for bioships. These are metal hulls. Lots of them." Thisari rushed to the sensor station. The readings made no sense. Hundreds of ships were dropping out of hyperspace at the system's edge. The energy signatures were unlike anything in the databases. "Are those the humans?" Veltar whispered. Before anyone could answer, the communication board lit up like a festival display. Hundreds of signals flooded in at once. Ship identification codes, fleet coordination chatter, medical transport registrations, combat vessel deployments, and above it all, a calm human voice cut through the chaos. "Kepler 442C Control. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Colonial Defense Force. Third Fleet has arrived to provide humanitarian assistance. Please clear orbital zones 1 through 15 for fleet deployment. We have aid to deliver." Thisari stared at the sensor readings as more ships kept appearing. The humans had not sent a few cargo vessels. They had not sent a small escort. They had sent an armada. Outside the command center windows, new stars had appeared in the sky. Hundreds of them gleaming like jewels against the darkness. Each one was a human ship. Each one had come to help people they had never met, on a world most humans had never heard of. Thisari began to cry, but for the first time in days they were tears of hope. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the TCS Indomitable, watching her fleet emerge from hyperspace like a mechanical sunrise. 847 ships materialized in perfect formation around Kepler 442C. The sight never got old. "Even after 30 years in the service, ma'am." "All vessels report successful transition," announced Lieutenant Martinez from the communication station. "Fleet is deployed and awaiting orders." Chen nodded and pulled up the mission briefing on her personal display. The request had been simple enough. A peaceful alien species called the Zephyrians needed help evacuating their world before hostile forces arrived. Standard humanitarian operation, the kind of thing the Terran Colonial Defense Force handled regularly. What made her smile was how different human ideas of standard were from everyone else's. "Tactical. Give me the fleet breakdown," she ordered. Commander Walsh cleared his throat and began reading from his station. 237 combat vessels, including 12 Prometheus-class heavy cruisers and the Dreadnought Indomitable. 152 medical ships and hospital platforms. 89 cargo transports carrying prefabricated structures and emergency supplies. 95 agricultural vessels with soil processors and hydroponic farms. 78 mining and construction ships, and 196 support vessels. Chen's deputy, Admiral Harrison, whistled low. "That's more firepower than most species have in their entire military. It's also more medical capacity than most galactic governments can field," Chen replied. The mission parameters called for humanitarian aid. "We don't do things halfway." The other senior officers exchanged glances. Captain Rodriguez, commanding the medical division, spoke up carefully. "Ma'am, with respect, the aliens requested evacuation assistance. We brought enough ships to relocate half the galaxy." Chen turned to face her staff. These were good officers, but they still thought small sometimes. "Let me ask you something, Captain. If your family was trapped on a world about to be attacked, would you want the rescue force to bring exactly enough ships, or would you want them to bring more than enough?" "More than enough, ma'am." "And if those same family members needed food, shelter, and medical care after being rescued, would you want the rescue force to provide the bare minimum, Or would you want them to bring everything needed to rebuild their lives? Rodriguez smiled. Everything needed to rebuild, Admiral. Exactly. The Zephyrians asked for aid. In human terms, that means we solve the entire problem, not just the immediate crisis. Chen gestured toward the planet spinning slowly below them. 2.3 million civilians need evacuation, medical care, food, shelter, and probably new homes. Our job is to provide all of that. On the main screen, reports were streaming in from across the fleet. Medical ships were deploying triage centers in orbit. Construction vessels were beginning to assemble prefabricated refugee camps on nearby moons. Agricultural ships were analyzing soil samples to determine what crops could be grown quickly. Admiral, called the communications officer, we're receiving a transmission from the planet. Audio only. Chen straightened her uniform. First contact with new species required proper protocol. Put them through. A translator device rendered the alien words into accented but understandable English. Terran vessels, this is Ambassador Thisari of the Zephyrian Colonial Authority. We did not expect such a large response to our request. Chen could hear the amazement in the alien's voice. Ambassador, this is Admiral Chen of the Third Fleet. We received your request for humanitarian assistance. My fleet is prepared to begin evacuation and aid operations immediately. Where would you like us to start? There was a long pause. When the ambassador spoke again, her voice was shaky. Admiral Chen, our sensors show nearly 1,000 ships in your fleet. We requested aid for 2 million civilians. Surely this is more than necessary. Chen smiled. Humans always got this reaction from other species. They thought in terms of minimum viable responses. Humans thought in terms of overwhelming success. Ambassador, in our experience, underestimating requirements leads to mission failure. We prefer to overestimate and ensure complete success. Is there a problem with our response level? No problem at all. We are simply overwhelmed by your generosity. Most species sent token assistance or ignored our requests entirely. You have brought what appears to be your entire military. Actually, this is just one of our colonial fleets. Chen replied casually. We have 7 others, plus the home defense forces. But the Third Fleet should be sufficient for this operation. Another long pause. Chen could imagine the aliens staring at their sensor readings, trying to process what they were seeing. Admiral, the ambassador said slowly, what exactly do you consider to be aid? Chen looked around the bridge at her officers, who were all grinning now. This was always the fun part. Ambassador, we consider aid to be the complete resolution of the problem. That means evacuation of all civilians who wish to leave, medical care for anyone who needs it, temporary housing that meets human standards of comfort and safety, food that is both nutritious and tasty, education for children, job training for adults, and permanent relocation to worlds where your people can rebuild their civilization. That sounds like you're planning to take care of our entire species. If necessary, yes. We've brought the resources to do exactly that. Chen pulled up another display showing cargo manifests. We have prefabricated cities for 5 million people, enough medical supplies to run 12 hospitals for 10 years, agricultural equipment to feed 50 million people, and educational materials for every age group. We also brought industrial fabricators to manufacture whatever else you might need. The silence stretched so long that Chen wondered if the communication link had failed. Finally, the ambassador spoke in a whisper. Admiral Chen, the hostile fleet approaching our world has 300 warships. They have destroyed 63 planets. How do you plan to defend against them with medical ships and agricultural vessels? Chen's smile turned predatory. Ambassador, I mentioned that we have 237 combat vessels in this fleet. Each of those ships carries more firepower than most species possess in their entire military. Our medical ships have better defensive systems than many nations' battleships. Our agricultural vessels could glass a planet if necessary, though we prefer to grow food on them. She paused to let that sink in. The Vorthak hegemony has destroyed 63 worlds, because no one has bothered to stop them properly. We're about to change that. You came here to provide humanitarian aid, the ambassador said. Confused? Yes. And part of providing complete humanitarian aid is removing the threat that made aid necessary in the first place. Chen's voice turned serious. Ambassador, when humans offer help, we mean it. All the way. No half measures. No political calculations. No minimum viable responses. We solve the entire problem. Lieutenant Martinez spoke up from his station. Admiral, long-range sensors are detecting the Vorthak fleet. They'll be in system in approximately 18 hours. Chen nodded. Signal the fleet. Begin Phase 1 operations. I want refugee processing centers operational within 6 hours, medical facilities online in 4 hours, and I want defensive positions established around all evacuation zones. She turned back to the communication station. Ambassador, please prepare your people for evacuation. We'll have transports ready to receive them shortly. And don't worry about the Vorthak. We'll handle them. How can you be so confident? The ambassador asked. Chen looked at the tactical display showing her fleet spreading out across the system like a protective net. 847 ships, each one carrying humans who had volunteered to travel across the galaxy to help people they had never met. Because, Ambassador, this is what humans do. We see a problem and we fix it. Completely. The Vorthak are about to learn what happens when you threaten people under human protection. As the communication ended, Chen turned to her staff. Any other questions about our response level? Admiral Harrison shook his head, grinning. No, ma'am. I think we brought exactly the right amount of everything. Good. Because we're about to show the galaxy what human humanitarian aid looks like. Conquest Prime Zektar stood in the pulsing heart of his flagship, feeling the bioship's excitement through the neural link that connected him to his vessel. The creature that served as his command ship was hungry. It had been 3 weeks since their last conquest, and the living weapon craved the life energy it would drain from another world. Report, he commanded, his voice a harsh rasp that echoed through the organic corridors of the ship. Sub-Commander Thelvas approached, his movements careful in the presence of his superior. The target system lies ahead. Initial scans confirm a single inhabited world with approximately 2 million life forms. Standard agricultural civilization, no significant military presence detected. Zektar smiled, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Excellent. A simple harvest, then. The bioships are eager to feed. He gestured toward the tactical display growing from the ship's living walls. Any defensive preparations? Minimal, Conquest Prime. A few dozen civilian transports attempting evacuation. Some cargo vessels from neighboring systems. Nothing that poses a threat to the fleet. The Vorthak had perfected their methods over decades of conquest. They would sweep into a system, overwhelm any resistance in minutes, and begin the harvest. Their bioships would drain the life force from everything on the planet, converting it into energy to fuel the next attack. It was efficient. It was unstoppable. 63 worlds had learned this lesson. None had survived to share it. Set course for the inhabited world, Zektar ordered. Full attack formation. I want this harvest completed quickly. 300 Vorthak bioships surged forward through space, their organic hulls rippling with anticipation. Each vessel was a living weapon, bred in the spawning pools of the hegemony homeworld and trained for one purpose: destruction. They moved together like a school of predatory fish, following instincts written into their genetic code. The Vorthak fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442c system, ready to begin another routine slaughter. What they found waiting for them was anything but routine. Conquest Prime, Thelvas called out, his voice tight with confusion. The sensor readings. They cannot be correct. Zektar moved to the tactical display, his confidence wavering for the first time in years. The bioship's sensors showed hundreds of contacts scattered throughout the system. Not the handful of civilian vessels they expected, but a massive fleet of unknown design. What are those ships? He demanded. Unknown configuration, Conquest Prime. The energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases. They appear to be constructed from metal rather than grown from organic matter. Zektar studied the formations. The alien vessels were arranged in defensive patterns around the inhabited world, with smaller groups positioned near what appeared to be evacuation sites. Their positioning was professional. Military. How many ships? Thelvas checked his readings again. Over 800 contacts, Conquest Prime. The largest concentration appears to be medical and transport vessels, but we're detecting significant weapon signatures from approximately 200 combat units. For a moment, Zektar hesitated. The Vorthak had built their empire by choosing targets carefully. They attacked only worlds they could conquer easily, avoiding anything that might result in significant losses to their fleet. But pride won over caution. He was Conquest Prime Zektar, conqueror of 63 worlds. No alien fleet would deny him his harvest. Open a communication channel to the alien fleet, he ordered. The transmission went out on standard frequencies, translated by automated systems into the common galactic trade language. Alien vessels, you are interfering with a Vorthak harvest operation. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed. The response came back quickly, in a calm female voice that somehow made Zektar's bioship shiver with unease. Vorthak Fleet, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Colonial Defense Force. You are interfering with a humanitarian operation. You have 30 seconds to reverse course and leave this system. Zektar laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Humans, I have heard of this species. Primitive newcomers who barely understand space travel. He opened the channel again. Admiral Chen, I am Conquest Prime Zektar of the Vorthak hegemony. I have conquered 63 worlds. Your pathetic fleet cannot stop the harvest. 20 seconds, came the human response. The casual tone infuriated Zektar. These humans dared to threaten him? Sub-Commander, signal the fleet. Attack formation. We will destroy every ship in this system and harvest the crews along with the planet. Conquest Prime, perhaps we should... Attack! Zektar roared. The Vorthak bioships surged forward, their living hulls changing color as they prepared for battle. Weapon pods opened along their sides like blooming flowers, revealing organic cannons that fired concentrated life-draining energy. 300 vessels of the most feared fleet in known space charged toward the human formation. The humans did not run. They did not panic. They simply adjusted their positions with mechanical precision. 10 seconds. Admiral Chen's voice counted down. Zektar watched his fleet close the distance, anticipating the moment when the aliens would break and flee. The Vorthak bioships were magnificent in their terrible beauty, flowing through space like living death. 5 seconds. The lead elements of his fleet reached weapons range of the human vessels. Zektar prepared to give the firing order. Time's up. The space around Kepler 442c lit up like a newborn star. The humans opened fire with weapons Zektar had never imagined. Streams of projectiles moving at impossible speeds shredded through bioship hulls like paper. Directed energy beams cut Vorthak vessels in half with surgical precision. Missiles that seemed to think for themselves weaved through. Defensive fire to detonate against command. Nodes, and the sound the bioships made as they died was something Zektar would never forget. His living vessels screamed through the neural link, their death cries echoing in his mind as the human fleet systematically destroyed everything he threw at them. The humans fought with terrifying efficiency, their ships moving in perfect coordination as they carved through the Vorthak formation. Impossible, Thelvas whispered. They're destroying us without taking losses. Zektar watched in horror as his magnificent fleet was reduced to expanding clouds of organic debris. The humans were not just winning. They were barely trying. Their defensive fire intercepted every Vorthak attack while their weapons reached out across vast distances to kill with pinpoint accuracy. Retreat, he finally screamed. All ships retreat. But it was too late. The humans had anticipated the withdrawal order. Faster vessels had moved to block escape routes while long-range weapons picked off fleeing bioships one by one. The Vorthak fleet, which had seemed unstoppable minutes before, was being systematically exterminated. Admiral Chen's voice cut through the chaos, still maddeningly calm. Vorthak Conquest Prime, you have 47 ships remaining. Surrender now and they will be spared. Zektar looked at his tactical display, 47 ships out of 300. The greatest military disaster in Vorthak history, and it had taken the humans less than 20 minutes. Who are you? He whispered into the communication channel. We told you, Terran Colonial Defense Force. We're here to provide humanitarian aid. The human admiral paused. The aid includes protecting our patients from hostile forces. You became a hostile force. Zektar's bioship shuddered as human weapons locked onto his flagship. Death was seconds away. We surrender, he said, the words tasting like poison. Smart choice. Signal your remaining ships to power down weapons and prepare for boarding. Any vessel that attempts to flee will be destroyed. As Vorthak bioships went dark across the system, Zektar slumped in his command throne. 63 worlds he had conquered. 63 victories that had made him the most feared commander in the hegemony. All meaningless now. Sub-Commander, he said quietly. Send a message to the Hegemony High Command. Tell them humanity is not what we thought. What should I tell them humanity is? Thelvas asked. Zektar looked at the human fleet still in perfect formation around the world they had come to protect. 800 ships that had just destroyed the most powerful military force in this region of space without apparent effort. Tell them humanity is something new, something dangerous, and tell them to stay away from any world under human protection. The communication channel crackled to life one more time. Admiral Chen's voice filled the bridge. Kepler 442C Control, this is Admiral Chen. Hostile fleet has been neutralized. Delivery operations resuming. Apologies for the delay. Zektar closed his eyes and tried not to think about what his superiors would do when they learned that their greatest conquest fleet had been destroyed by aliens delivering medical supplies. Ambassador Thaisari floated in the medical bay of the human hospital ship Mercy, watching through the transparent aluminum windows as construction crews worked on the planet's surface below. 3 days had passed since the battle, and she was still trying to understand what she was seeing. Where once there had been empty plains, a city now stood. Not the temporary refugee camps she had expected, but actual buildings with running water, electricity, and climate control. Streets laid out in careful grids, parks with earth trees that somehow grew alongside native Zephyrian plants, schools where her people's children learned beside human instructors. The growth rate is remarkable, Dr. Elizabeth Santos said, checking the readings on Thaisari's medical scanner. Your people's healing response to our treatments is faster than we hoped. The stress injuries from the evacuation should be completely healed within a week. Thaisari nodded absently, still staring at the city below. Dr. Santos, how did your people build all of that so quickly? The human doctor smiled. Prefabricated construction. We brought everything needed to house 500,000 refugees, plus infrastructure for double that number. Our engineering crews can assemble a complete city in 72 hours if they push themselves. But why? We only needed temporary shelter until we could find new homes. Dr. Santos paused in her work. Ambassador, may I ask you something? When you were a child and fell down, did your parents just help you stand up, or did they clean your wounds and make sure you were okay? They made sure I was okay, Thaisari replied, confused by the question. Exactly. Humans don't fix problems halfway. If we're going to help, we help completely. The doctor gestured toward the window. Those aren't temporary refugee camps. That's New Zephyr City, designed to be your people's home for as long as they want to stay, maybe permanently. The medical bay doors slid open and Admiral Chen entered, still wearing her blue fleet uniform. She looked tired but satisfied, like someone who had just finished a difficult but rewarding job. Ambassador, I hope you don't mind the interruption. I wanted to check on your recovery and discuss some administrative matters. Thaisari struggled to sit up in the medical chair. Admiral Chen, I should be thanking you, not lying here while you visit me. Your fleet saved my entire species, Chen waved dismissively. No thanks necessary. We were doing our job. She pulled up a chair and sat down casually. I actually wanted to talk to you about what happens next. Next? Well, we've successfully evacuated your population and neutralized the immediate threat. But now we need to make long-term plans. Where would your people like to settle permanently? Thaisari blinked in confusion. Admiral, surely your fleet needs to return to human space. You have done more than enough. Chen looked genuinely puzzled. Ambassador, our mission was to provide humanitarian aid. That mission isn't complete until your people have permanent homes, stable food supplies, medical care, education systems, and economic opportunities. We've barely started, but the Vorthak fleet is destroyed. The immediate crisis is over. The immediate military crisis is over, Chen corrected. But you still have 2 million refugees who need homes. Your agricultural equipment was left behind on Kepler 442C. Your medical facilities were destroyed. Your educational records were lost. Your economic system collapsed. We still have a lot of work to do. Dr. Santos nodded in agreement. The Admiral is right. We've treated the symptoms but not the underlying problems that made your people vulnerable in the first place. Thaisari felt overwhelmed again. Admiral, what you're describing sounds like rebuilding our entire civilization. Exactly, Chen said cheerfully. That's the plan. We've allocated resources for a complete reconstruction program. New agricultural worlds with improved soil and climate control. Medical facilities that meet both human and Zephyrian standards. Educational systems that combine your traditional knowledge with human technology. And industrial capacity to make your people economically independent. That would take years. Decades even. Probably closer to 5 years for basic infrastructure, 10 years for full independence, Chen agreed. We've done similar projects before. The Kepler colonies were built from scratch in 7 years. New Geneva took 8 years, but they had more challenging environmental conditions. Thaisari stared at the human admiral. You have built entire civilizations before? Several times. It's standard procedure for refugee resettlement operations. We learned early in our space expansion that half measures create long-term problems. Better to invest the resources up front and create stable, self-sufficient communities. The ambassador's head was spinning. Admiral, the cost of such an operation must be enormous. What do you expect in return? Chen looked confused. In return for what? For rebuilding our civilization. Surely you expect some form of payment. Trade agreements? Political alliance? Military service? Ambassador, Chen said gently. We're providing humanitarian aid. Aid doesn't come with strings attached. If your people want to establish trade relationships with humanity in the future, that would be nice. If you don't, that's fine too. This isn't an investment. It's just the right thing to do. Thaisari felt tears forming in her eyes. I don't understand. No species does this. No one provides aid without expecting something in return. Dr. Santos spoke up. Ambassador, may I share something from human history? About 300 years ago, before we had space travel, our planet was hit by a massive earthquake. Millions of people were left homeless. Do you know what happened? Thaisari shook her head. Countries from around the world sent help. Food, medicine, rescue teams, money. They didn't expect payment. They didn't demand political concessions. They helped because people were suffering and they could do something about it. The doctor smiled. We brought that same attitude to space with us. Admiral Chen stood up and moved to the window. Ambassador, I want to show you something that might help you understand. She activated a wall display that showed tactical information from across the system. Thaisari could see human ships scattered throughout Kepler 442c's solar system, each one working on different projects. Medical ships treating refugees, Chen narrated, pointing to clusters of vessels. Agricultural ships preparing soil for farming. Construction ships building permanent settlements. Industrial ships manufacturing everything from furniture to children's toys. Mining ships extracting resources for the construction projects. She changed the display to show a wider view. Transport ships moving between systems, bringing in additional supplies and taking small groups of refugees to explore potential new homeworlds. Patrol ships establishing security perimeters to make sure no one else tries to threaten your people. Research ships studying local conditions to optimize our aid efforts. Thaisari counted the ships on the display. There are more vessels here now than when you arrived. We called in additional resources as needed. The 2nd Engineering Fleet arrived yesterday. The 5th Medical Group is coming next week. Whatever it takes to do the job properly. But the cost, Chen turned back to her. Ambassador, humanity has been expanding across the galaxy for 50 years. We've learned that stable, prosperous neighbors make for a stable, prosperous region. Helping your people isn't just charity, it's an investment in galactic stability. Even if we never provide anything in return, even then, though I suspect you'll find ways to contribute. Your people's agricultural knowledge is already helping us improve food production on several human worlds. Your medical techniques are fascinating to our doctors. Your art and music are beautiful. You have more to offer than you realize. Thaisari looked out at the city growing on her world below. Human construction crews worked alongside Zephyrian refugees building something new together. Children of both species played in parks designed by artists from both cultures. Admiral, she said quietly, what you're doing, it's going to change everything. Not just for my people, but for the entire galaxy. Chen nodded thoughtfully. Probably. Other species are already asking questions about our aid packages. The Galactic Council has sent 3 diplomatic missions to observe our operations. Apparently they're trying to understand how we can afford to be so generous. And how do you afford it? We don't think of it as an expense. We think of it as building the kind of galaxy we want to live in. Chen smiled. A galaxy where no one has to face extinction alone. Where every species has the chance to thrive. Where problems get solved completely instead of just managed. Dr. Santos finished her medical scans and began packing her equipment. Ambassador, you're cleared for full activity. No restrictions. Your people's physiological response to human medical techniques has exceeded all expectations. As the doctor left, Chen prepared to follow her. Ambassador, we'll be here for as long as you need us. And if you ever need help again in the future, just call. Humanity remembers its friends. After the humans left, Thesari sat alone in the medical bay watching the city grow below. For the first time since the crisis began, she allowed herself to think about the future. Not just survival, but actual prosperity, growth, hope. The humans had not just saved her people, they had given them a chance to become something greater than they had ever been before, and apparently they considered this routine. 6 months after the Vorthak attack, Ambassador Thesari stood in her new office in New Zephyr City, reviewing reports that would have seemed like science fiction just a year ago. The daily briefings from across Kepler 442c read like a catalog of impossible achievements. Agricultural output had increased by 400%. The human soil enhancement techniques had turned marginal farmland into the most productive growing areas in the sector. Medical centers staffed by joint human-Zephyrian teams were treating patients from 12 different species. The orbital defense platforms completed last month made Kepler 442c one of the most heavily defended systems in known space. Ambassador, called her assistant, Veltar from the outer office. Admiral Harrison is here for the weekly coordination meeting. Thesari set down her reports and smoothed her formal robes. Admiral Harrison commanded the permanent human presence in the system. Only 50 ships now, but each one more advanced than anything the old Galactic Council could field. Admiral, please come in, she said as the human officer entered. I was just reading the latest productivity reports. Your people's efficiency continues to amaze me. Admiral Harrison smiled and took the offered seat. Actually, Ambassador, those are your people's achievements now. The agricultural increases are because Zephyrian farmers are using human techniques. The medical breakthroughs are coming from joint research teams. We're just providing tools and training. Tools that cost more than most planetary governments' entire budgets. Tools that pay for themselves, Harrison corrected. This system is already producing enough surplus food to supply 3 other worlds. The medical research being done here is advancing treatment for diseases across human space, and the cultural exchange programs are teaching us new ways of thinking about everything from agriculture to art. Thesari pulled up a star chart on her wall display. Admiral, I've been monitoring galactic communications. The reports about human aid packages are spreading. 3 governments have preemptively resolved border disputes rather than risk needing humanitarian assistance. The Antaran Trade Consortium has offered humanity preferred trading status without even being asked. Harrison laughed. We've noticed. Fleet Command is getting requests for aid from systems that aren't even in crisis yet. Apparently some species have decided that having humans show up with 1,000 ships is preferable to waiting until they actually need help. Can you blame them? Thesari gestured toward the window, where human and Zephyrian children played together in parks that had been designed by artists from both cultures. What you call routine humanitarian aid is reshaping galactic civilization. The Admiral grew more serious. That's actually what I wanted to discuss today. We've received intelligence reports about how other powers are responding to humanity's visibility. Thesari felt a chill. Hostile responses? Mixed. The Vorthak hegemony has pulled back from 3 sectors and is avoiding any system with a human presence. That's good. But the Kralix Empire is building up their military, claiming they need to balance human expansion. That's less good. Are they planning to attack human colonies? No. They're smart enough to realize that would be suicide. But they're pressuring smaller species to choose sides, creating artificial scarcity to make other governments dependent on Kralix aid, instead of potentially calling for human help. Thesari considered this. A Cold War, then. Competition between different models of aid and alliance. Exactly. The old model was minimal help with maximum strings attached. Pay tribute, accept political control. Provide military service. Our model is maximum help with no strings attached. Harrison shrugged. Some governments find our approach threatening to their traditional power structures. Because if their people know that real help is possible, they'll demand it from their own leaders. Or they'll call for human aid instead of accepting whatever scraps their governments offer. Thesari walked to her window and looked out at the thriving city below. Construction crews were adding another residential district to accommodate refugees from the Outer Rim, where the Kralix Empire had recently stabilized several rebellious worlds. The Outer Rim refugees were learning that human aid meant permanent homes, not temporary camps. Admiral, I need to ask you something directly. Are humans building an empire? Harrison joined her at the window. That's a question our government debates constantly. We're not conquering territory or demanding tribute. We're not forcing anyone to adopt human laws or customs, but we are creating a zone of influence where human standards of aid and protection apply. And what are human standards? Complete solutions to problems, overwhelming response to threats, long-term investment in stability and prosperity. The Admiral paused, and absolute protection for anyone who asks for help. That sounds like an empire to me. Just a different kind of empire. Maybe you're right, but if so, it's an empire where membership is voluntary and withdrawal is always allowed. We've never stopped anyone from asking us to leave. Has anyone ever asked you to leave? Harrison smiled. Not yet, though to be fair, we make it very comfortable to have us around. A communication alert chimed from Tisseri's desk. She activated the display to find an urgent message from the Galactic Council. Admiral, she said after reading the message, you might want to see this. The Council is formally requesting that humanity establish protocols for humanitarian aid operations. They want to create a standardized system for requesting human assistance. Requesting our assistance to help other people request our assistance? Harrison shook his head. That's very meta. What's their real concern? They're worried about smaller species bypassing the Council entirely and calling directly for human aid. 3 governments this month have ignored Council mediation attempts and sent direct appeals to Earth. And humanity responded? Of course you responded. The Council is afraid they're becoming irrelevant. Harrison read over the formal request more carefully. They want us to channel all aid requests through official Council procedures. Require political approval before responding to humanitarian crises. Accept Council oversight of aid operations. What will humanity's response be? We'll be polite but firm. Humanitarian aid isn't subject to political approval. If people need help, we help them. The Council is welcome to observe our operations, but they don't get to control them. Thisari nodded. That's what I expected. And that's what will make this a new kind of galaxy. How so? Before humanity arrived, help always came with conditions. Political conditions, economic conditions, military conditions. Species learned to accept suffering rather than become dependent on unreliable allies. She gestured toward the city below. But you've shown that help can be unconditional, complete, permanent. That changes everything. Admiral Harrison's communication device chimed. He read the message and frowned. Speaking of changing everything, I just got new orders. The Outer Rim Coalition has requested assistance with border security. Apparently, they're facing increased pressure from multiple hostile neighbors. How will humanity respond? 3 guesses, Thisari laughed. Let me think. You'll send a fleet large enough to secure the entire region. Establish permanent defensive installations, provide economic aid to strengthen the coalition's independence, and offer long-term security guarantees with no strings attached. You've learned how we operate. Admiral, may I make an observation? Of course. Humanity isn't building an empire in the traditional sense. You're building something new, a protection zone where civilized behavior is enforced and genuine aid is always available. You're making suffering optional in this part of the galaxy. Harrison looked thoughtful. That's an interesting way to put it. Making suffering optional. It's what you've done for my people. 6 months ago, we were facing extinction. Today, our children are learning in schools better than anything we had before the crisis. Our sick are being healed by the most advanced medicine in the galaxy. Our farmers are growing food that feeds not just ourselves, but 3 other worlds. And in return, we've learned new agricultural techniques, medical treatments, and cultural perspectives that benefit all of humanity, Harrison pointed out. This isn't charity. It's mutual benefit. But you didn't know that when you came. You sent 800 ships to help people you'd never met, expecting nothing in return. True. Thisari turned back to her desk and picked up a personal communication device. Admiral, I've been keeping a journal since the crisis began, recording what it's like to experience human aid from the recipient's perspective. Would you like to hear the most recent entry? I'd be honored. She activated the device and read in her own voice. Personal log, Ambassador Thisari, date 127.3 post-contact. Today I realized something that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago. My people are no longer afraid, not of invasion, not of starvation, not of disease, not of technological stagnation. For the first time in our recorded history, we feel genuinely safe. She paused the recording. Do you understand what that means, Admiral? An entire species that feels safe for the first time in their history? Harrison was quiet for a long moment. That's a responsibility I'm not sure we're prepared for. Too late. You've already accepted it, and you've shown the galaxy that such safety is possible. Thaisari smiled. The old powers are terrified because they know their people will demand the